First of all, let me thank the ICPDR and especially Ms. Koch and Elaine for their contribution and their work. You may approach us, please. So we also have a wonderful welcome back for you. Just with a reusable cup for coffee, and with a USB stick with all the material on it. And so this is for you. Thank you very much. Let me also thank our two wonderful ladies, Sabi and Gabi, who welcomed you yesterday and will guide you through the week of this conference. So these two ladies are now your personal shadows for the rest of the week. Any questions you might have, you can address them to them. Of course, only related to the conference. Let me also thank all other members of our NGO who made this conference possible, especially Bernhard, Christian, Marco, Julian, Michele and Tulo. Let me also thank the Secretariat for this conference, Sarah, Wojnar and my good friend Walter, who will open the conference tomorrow. Trust me, you're in good hands. Special thanks also goes to my better half, who kept me always calm when something went wrong or didn't turn out as it was supposed to be, and looked out for solutions. Moreover, I would also like all partners and sponsors, and especially Smart Academy, for their media team and continuous support. Also a special thanks to Truff, to Martin, to Noor, Wael, and Isa. I also thank you, fellow delegates, taking part in this conference and making it happen. Because what would be a conference without participants? I hope I have thought about everyone. No, one party I have totally forgotten. And this is our planet Earth, who has provided us with so many resources, shelters, and beauty. So thank you, planet Earth, for being there for us. Us who aren't there for you. Us who are extracting resources like mad, polluting and damaging your beauty. Us who don't understand that your current ecosystem in its uniqueness is there for our own survival. For you, planet Earth, it doesn't matter if you're a hot or a cold planet. A planet full of life, or without, you will continue to exist. But we as humans won't be there anymore if we continue like before. We are fragile creatures adapted to the current state and not to any other. And it is even more severe that we are destroying our own future and the uniqueness of this planet, which needed to be formed for so long. In this regard, let us watch a short introduction video. Thanks a lot, Khaled, for your great contribution. Let me tell you that as an organizer, every day a conference comes closer, you're getting more exhausted and exhausted, and then you also need to think about a speech. And unfortunately, you don't have anybody who's writing it for you. To be honest, I'm not an eloquent speaker, and it is always difficult to be the first one. All in all, I will guide you through the topics of the conference in a few words, which is not an easy task at all. Furthermore, I also want you to stay focused. Well, let me see if I will manage this. So, let me start with the idea and why I devote my spare time to such a project. Traveling to other countries is not always relaxing, but sometimes also quite depressing. When you see deforestation and degradation of land, consumption and exploitation of resources in Asia, Africa, Oceania, North and South America. I have experienced climate change and severe weather events all over the world. As an example, flash floods in the middle of summer in Alice Springs, Australia, typhoons in Shanghai. On the other hand, severe droughts in Asia and Africa. Just in 2015, experienced the biggest bushfire in the history of Sumatra, destroying huge areas of land, covering Singapore and even Malacca and Penang in a cloud of haze. It could be coincidence, but I think it is not. I think that everybody can see and feel that our global planet is changing. Here in Europe, summers are getting longer and winter shorter. Also, shift of climate pattern occurs in November, December are getting now nicer, and January and February colder, at least in Central Europe. So why am I doing this? Because I think, as I was privileged enough to visit so many countries, I see my responsibility in giving something back. To educate others so they don't make the same mistakes as our predecessors. I know it is an elevated goal, but I think it is worth it. Coming to the topics, which are the most pressing ones for our future survival. We have a global population boom like never in our history of existence. It is estimated that in 2050, 10 billion people will populate our planet. That means we have a population growth of 400% in just 100 years, from 2.5 billion in 1950 to 10 billion people in 2050. More people, and especially affluent people, need more resources, pollute more, and discard more products. As we already use 50% more resources than our Earth can regenerate in 1 year, we are living in a very unsustainable and unbalanced way. We are watching news about environmental degradation and pollution. Dead whales, fish, mammals, and animals treated in a very cruel way. Nevertheless, as a scientist, you shouldn't let yourself be blinded by the media, but look for true facts. Unfortunately, these facts correlate with the news of the media. But let me ask you, we see these images and do we really change our habits? Generally, we don't at all. We do feel pity for a moment and flip to the next channel. Then we ask ourselves what we shall drink or eat for dinner, lunch, breakfast. We have reached such a high standard of living, at least in high-income countries, that we don't think about tomorrow. We consume and consume more products in high quantities, but not quality. The main thing is they need to be cheap. In this regard, I want to quote His Holiness, the Curate Dalai Lama. We have bigger houses, but smaller families. More convenience, but less time. We have more degrees but less sense, more knowledge but less judgment, more experts but more problems, more medicines but less healthiness. We have been all the way to the moon and back, but we have trouble crossing the street to meet the new neighbor. We have built more computers to hold more information, to produce more copies than ever, but have less communications. We have become long on quantity, but short on quality. These times are times so fast of fast foods, but slow digestion. Tall man, but short character. Steep profits, but shallow relationships. It is time when there is much in the window, but nothing in the room. I know it is not easy to live in our current society, which accelerates fast. However, we have all we need, the technology, the communication channels, and actually also the solutions. But we don't use them. We are kept in our business life, work, gain money, spend money, work again. Everything is about cost and needs to be quantified. As an example, energy efficiency just leads to cheaper energy. So why should I care turning off my devices if it just costs me a few cents? Let me ask you, the audience, how many portable devices do you have? Raise your hand if just one. Okay. Raise your hand if two. 3. Okay. 4, even 4 or more. Okay. So I see the majority has around 2 devices. And actually, let me ask you, how many do you use? Can you use 2 portable devices at the same moment? I don't think so. Yes, you can? Okay, you can show me. I want to be impressed. Ladies and gentlemen, water and food are the most precious resources for living organisms. For us, with a very fragile immune system, both need to be there in a very high quality. Nevertheless, the quality is changing. Processed food, which we eat in high-income countries, contains more fertilizers, pesticides and herbicides. Frankly, just chemicals. And from Bote's new movie, The Green Lie, I know organic is just less toxic. Water is actually the most precious resource which we have, and we consume it thriftlessly. Overall, water, degradation of soils, food security, and environmental pollution are closely connected. Ladies and gentlemen, just 3.5% of the global water resources are fresh water, and still 1 billion people lack access to clean drinking water. Water is the most common product in our daily life. Without any water, we are gone within 3 days. Most of our products need fresh water to be manufactured. Electricity production needs fresh water for cooling. Also, water is the most precious resource for us as humans beings. We handle it carelessly. Sorry to announce it again. The average water consumption of human being varies between 2 liters per day in Mozambique and up to 570 liters per day in the United States of America. We pollute water with oil, sewage, heavy metals and other endocrine substances such as BPA, bisphenol A, microplastics and medicaments. And everybody in the high-income countries is doing this. Just let me give you another figure. 75% of fresh water is being contaminated with microplastic. 75%. and we just don't know what it will do to our body. Actually, we do know, but just to a certain extent. Microplastics or plastics are long-chain polymers which are derived from fossil fuels. This is not the bad part. The bad part is that plastics compromise in their composition a lot of fillers and additives, and most of them are not well known. Furthermore, microplastic attracts persistent organic materials and heavy pollutants and heavy metal, which we then consume. Through our nutrition chain and our water, we consume them, which actually lead to severe health issues in our endocrine system, such as cancer, allergies, infertility, obesity, and many others. The worst part is that these additives react like hormones, so it doesn't matter how much you consume. Coming to soil. Ladies and gentlemen, just let me tell you, I'm not a soil expert. I just know a bit about how our planet has been formed, tectonics, volcanic and seismic eruption, microorganisms, you name it. Nevertheless, let me tell you, soil is not soil. It differs in its shape, size, and composition. Fertile soil is becoming rare, leading to clashes of tribes and civil war in Africa and the Middle East. Pollution of soil in high-income countries takes place like nowhere before. Intensive agriculture with energy-intensive plants, too many fertilizers, herbicides and pesticides lead to degradation of soils and infertility of the soil. There are many solutions, but actually I'm looking forward to hear them from our panel speakers later today. Ladies and gentlemen, well, our food is not healthy anymore. Poisoned with so many different chemicals, estrogens and antibiotics, we are actually eating pure chemicals, like said before. At the current state, we have a loss of biodiversity 1,000 times higher than at the natural state, and a global extinction of pollinators. Accumulated, this problem with degradation of soils, this poses a severe threat to our food security. Another problem is meat. Meat production, actually, 75% of agricultural land is being taken by pasture. And animals need more actually land as we are increasing. They emit a lot of methane as animals shit, and they eat a lot of food. Ladies and gentlemen, just in Germany, we killed 55 million pigs in 2017 and 1.1 million cows in just 1 year. And we are wasting more than 50% of our food as it doesn't meet standard criteria or is getting bad along the supply chain. And still, nearly 1 billion people are undernourished. Is there still hope for our survival, or is everything lost? Well, I can't tell you. I can just tell you, if we don't start decreasing our carbon footprint, it is the end of our existence. If we don't start in educating ourselves by setting an environmental consciousness and telling our experiences to others, I can say game over. The civil society has a major role in changing our habits and the way we currently live. There should be smart grassroots movements and not just those who don't lead to improvements and are wasting resources. I hope this year's conference will be such an event again, which let me personally recover energy and hope and pursue further. Overall, you are the ones who are able to make a change. And you did a first step in the right direction by joining this conference with your various backgrounds and experiences. And I'm proud of all of you. With all this being said, I'm looking forward to a fruitful conference with a lot of interesting debates, exchange of ideas, and maybe setup of new environmental projects. For sure, you will experience good memories and make long-lasting friendships. Now I thank you for your attention. I hope you didn't sleep at all. And looking forward to interesting panel discussions. Thanks a lot. As we are a bit ahead of time, which is good, I kindly ask you, Helene, to make the keynote speech for your boss. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having us here and happy to be part of this event, at least partially. Again, I'd like to thank my colleague Silvia Koch, who's really made it possible to help with logistics support on site. Yes, so allow me, on behalf of our Executive Secretary, Mr. Ivan Zawadzki, to welcome you here. Unfortunately, he could not be here today. This was a last-minute problem, and I had to jump in for him. But he wanted to make sure that the ICPDR was here to welcome you at this particularly important conference. As you may know or may not know, the ICPDR is a key river basin organization which addresses transboundary water resources management with the purpose of making the waters of the Danube cleaner, healthier, and safer for the next generations to enjoy. We are implementing the Danube River Protection Convention as a main legal framework for this transboundary cooperation. We are also coordinating the implementation of two pieces of key EU legislation in the water sector, the Water Framework Directive and the Floods Directive. We elaborate two key documents, the River Basin Management Plan and the Flood Risk Management Plan. So as I said, you are here, you are the next generation. We are here, the ICPDR, to preserve our waters for the next generations. We want to make the Danube cleaner, healthier, and safer for the next generations to enjoy. And you are here, all of you, the next generation. So we are counting on you, and not only to carry on a tradition of respect and for water resources, but also to do better and to build on what we and all organizations worldwide have achieved. So on behalf of the ICPDR, allow me to wish you the best in what's sure going to be a rigorous, challenging, and enlightening conference. Congratulations again for the organization, David. Thank you.
So it is good to be ahead of time, and yeah, I think you are also now all awakened, and yeah, you also had a small shower this morning. So I think you still have time for a coffee break. I just kindly ask you to be here back again 5 minutes past 10. Thank you.
She have a list. Wait for it. You are looking around what's going on. How can I become food and take a place?
I think I need to take a quick nap.
Quick nap. Where did you grow up? In which country you grow up? Where were you raised?
Hong Kong.
No, because you are so, I thought you have to be from one big city.
Yeah, Hong Kong is big.
Yeah, Hong Kong is huge. But the way you are.
Oh, it's a great country.
No, you're very open-minded, warm girl. I noticed that. Well, I noticed that. And you're also quite charming. Thank you. I mean, 65% of people are shy. They need time to open up.
Actually, I'm shy, actually. To be honest, I just pretend not to be shy. Sometimes I just pretend. Sometimes I just
Do you know if we
So
I would prefer my because I just I love corn. I love it too. I totally agree working at
I love it. Just take from different corners. Okay. Now she's making a picture of us. We have to make a smiley or whatever.
Make a smile.
No, we are making a smiley.
But that's my smile.
Take it seriously. Okay, so how do I do it? Okay, so seriously, like as if you were in a conference. So professional.
So like
now.
you're like
Sorry.
in a conference, you have to read something from your phone.
Okay. Are you going with this one?
With this one, we're going with this one. Yeah. My glasses.
This is not serious. Come on.
It's totally serious service. So very important people they listen to.
Okay. I made a lot, so
Thank you.
you can choose.
Thank you.
I don't know. What are you doing, man? It's not serious.
This one is so good one. Look. Oh, and if you make it
That's creepy.
black and white, it's excellent. Take it photography.
Yeah, you excellent.
I
Appreciate you.
You know, really, it's hard to find people because people don't have idea about like they cut you off or they put person standing next. Even they could somehow make a picture that this person is not, it doesn't belong to them. It's very good. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Very good, really. We're gonna choose some of these. Really, really good. We're gonna make it with you too. No, just we have to make a situation, train positions.
Nee, also danach. Das ist echt gut.
Okay.
Musst du filmen, ne?
Now we're gonna make it with you too. We have to make situation. Okay, situations and they look like all the same. I don't know. Something.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Oshi. Nice to meet you. Jasmine. Jasmine, where are you from? I'm from Hong Kong. Oh, nice to meet you. And when did you arrive here? Saturday morning. So you came just directly from Hong Kong just to participate in this camp? No. At the moment, I live in Denmark. Oh yeah, me too. Oh, Denmark. And oh, you guys from Denmark?
No, we currently live in Copenhagen.
Yeah, but
Like the three of us.
yeah,
but
so
we're all
we're
from
temporarily. But I'm not.
What a coincidence.
Yeah, but I'm not from Copenhagen. I'm from the fourth biggest city. The fourth biggest city. The fourth. Yeah.
It's iceberg or something.
Yeah, four. Fourth biggest city of Denmark.
Fourth biggest city.
There are only like 4 cities, so it's fine.
Yeah, iceberg or something.
Kommer fra Aalborg.
Aalborg. Are you Danish?
Nej. Nej.
Where are you from?
Hong Kong.
Okay, what's your name?
Jasmine.
Jasmine, okay. Hi, I'm Deepku. Yeah.
But they can pronounce it like
Can I have a look?
what's happening.
So it is Australia, but
Australia. There is no English name here. I don't know why. They just put my Chinese name on.
So you've got a Chinese and an English name.
Not in the passport, but the people just call me Jasmine because that's the easier name for you guys. I guess.
Yeah.
Did you choose it yourself? I guess so. It was like a long time ago. Yeah.
Which country do you represent?
Oh, Uganda.
Oh, we have oh no, Katie wanted to do Uganda, but she's not here. Another girl that I'm staying with, Katie, she wanted to do Uganda.
It's actually on Facebook Live
Okay,
right
so
now.
she's not from country.
No, yeah, I just know because I'm staying with her.
Otherwise, I can partner with her.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah, but
when
she
I
had to
stopped
quit
and then turn it back on and
registered
shoot it
for
back
the
on.
conference because she has uni
Kept it
stuff
recording
every
the
day
whole time.
and exams now this week, so she cannot come.
Yeah.
But you can answer
Actually,
when
I'm also
I
doing
can,
with
yeah.
one
I
exam.
can go to my laptop.
This is,
and
but that's a
people and
technical one, so
respond.
I could be more
Okay.
flexible with this stuff.
Yeah.
you have to see how it works now.
Where are you studying?
When I was working with
Yeah, in Opel.
Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Is it doing?
It's great. But it's like 1 in the morning where most
You're
of
very
Doesn't matter.
I'm from Hungary.
Everyone's California.
Someone just said something. Who's the girl with the music
thanks.
So what are you studying?
Really? Yeah. Exactly. Wonderful. It's actually done professionally.
Why did you
I
It looks
did
professional.
Because
Because
it was
I'm
not
interested
but
in
it actually was made
environmental
by
and
professionals.
also I like ambient,
So it's working. Thank you.
the format of ambient. Yeah.
That was a nice break, between everything.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
Coffee and
I was half like because I joined ambient before, like during my high school, so I
So where
kind
most
missed
of
the
your
experience. I
followers
wanted to
share?
Yeah.
really good question.
Okay, cool.
I live
I don't even know
in
if
Santa
there's one
Cruz,
in
California, in
Okay.
the U.S. And I've lived there on and off for 27 years. So the majority of my 5,000 Facebook friends are located in that area. So maybe 800 to 1,200 of those friends. And the rest of them are from other countries that I've traveled to around the
But
world.
I have no idea what the difference is. What we have to do.
So actually, mostly you just have to be
Oh, you
close
found them.
relative.
No, that's a
like
friend
you
of
just have
mine.
to speak
Oh,
and negotiate with other
This
countries, job resolution.
Maybe I should have
This
been
is
an
a
expert
Facebook
as
Live.
well.
It's okay. You
What?
can
How do I find it?
I don't think I would be able to be a
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
It's just a bit tricky. It's just a bit tricky when you have to negotiate.
She said she
Yeah, I
represent my country more complicated.
Oh.
oh yeah.
So you just
Okay, you have to give me some tips then.
All right.
Yeah, yeah. I make
one
some.
where I'm wearing
But yeah, I mean,
yellow reflective vest.
here, I mean, you can
Okay.
practice here, right? This is nothing serious. So.
Oh, are you holding a speech after?
I think that the only situation is you would be
And
better.
I'm also doing the Facebook.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
see, I see.
So this is reaching my 5,000 Facebook friends and 1,400 followers from around the world, and this will be able to be shared and downloaded later. People can look at it and reference it.
Then
Right.
And I'm also giving the
Yeah,
presentation
yeah.
because I do journalism work,
Okay.
and I have over the last 18
Yeah,
years.
exactly.
So a lot of people know me from journalism projects, and then I also do disaster relief and environmental stuff. So I'm kind of doing
Right.
yeah, both.
But originally you're a journalist, or are you?
No, originally I was
Okay.
doing journalism work, and that's when I saw so much destruction and pollution, degradation of the environment, a lot of suffering. That's when I transitioned into emergency services and doing first responder type stuff and disaster relief. Because you don't want to just take pictures.
No, of course.
You want to. So now I'm able to ride along on convoys, transporting food. I'm able to be in helicopters,
Okay.
help people directly, and have my camera like right here, and be
Right.
helping and be in that situation, and then take pictures of it and document and write about it later, and get it out through the social media, worldwide internet, and news outlets. So it also keeps people honest. So when aid's being distributed unevenly, they know that I'm like with the press because I have a press pass. It keeps people more honest.
That's
and-
it. That's interesting.
yeah, and I get a perspective nobody else really gets. So
Sounds very interesting.
it is, and some of the things that I've experienced, like having the like volunteering in hospitals, moving dead bodies, going on helicopters to transport aid. A lot of those situations, you wouldn't have the opportunity to see what it's like as a journalist. And a lot of people don't respond to you well in third world countries or disaster areas if you are a journalist. But when I wear a stethoscope and I present myself as a medic and I'm treating medical injuries,
Oh, you are? Okay.
you have to do the medical course.
You're authorized to do that?
Yes, correct. So I've taken a lot of the first responder courses, a lot of the medical courses,
Right.
and I've been able to treat people and provide some form of first aid, help out with the disaster relief, and do the journalism. And my backpack's pretty crazy when I have all this stuff for those three main categories.
Right. So what kind of areas or topics did you get associated in? Was it always like natural catastrophes, or was it
Yeah, so I started off when I was young doing like BMX video, skateboard, and then when I got older I started working for TV stations because I had audio video experience.
Right.
And then that's when I started covering a lot of forest fires on my own, landslides, snowstorms, blizzards, floods, and then I started selling it to the news agencies. Then I went freelance and I didn't work for them, but I would go cover stuff. And the first major thing that I covered was when I went to New Orleans right after Hurricane Katrina, right after that main hurricane. And I was 2005, and I was 25 years old, so I was really young. And I wanted to help, and I tried, and I distributed some food, and I did, but I just didn't feel satisfied that I was able to help enough people.
Right.
But I did take a lot of pictures, and I did drive down streets before the government and the military. And when I came back, I started taking all the Red Cross courses, the CERT course, which is underneath FEMA, it's Community Emergency Response Team. I took the EMT course, and I went to college on and off for 8 years and got a lot of units there in first responder, in sustainable construction and design, and hazardous materials, and a lot of subjects that apply to what I'm doing. And then after that, I went to the Philippines after the superstorm. I went to Ghana during the Ebola outbreak. A couple years ago, I went to Iraq by myself and I helped out there. And
So,
last year, different.
yeah, that's very, very different kind of situation, especially with Iraq. But like violent conflicts switching on and off and so
I could try
on.
to mix up my portfolio.
Yeah, it's
So
definitely.
I haven't covered volcanic eruption, and that's like next on my list.
Oh, okay.
And I also want to go to Greenland at some point to cover the melting glacier.
Oh, wow, that's. But you didn't go to Puerto Rico just recently.
Yes, I did.
You did. Oh, okay.
I was
okay.
there for 3 months doing disaster.
Wow. Okay.
So I went
No,
to.
because I watched a small documentary about the situation in Puerto Rico, and
Yeah, it was horrible.
yeah, definitely. And I think it was yesterday or a few days ago
They went back without power.
yeah, that the power went back up. That's just.
Looks like they're starting to go up. So we got a few
Alright.
seconds. Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's Puerto Rico, and then I was in Florida during Irma, and I was in Texas right after Harvey. And I've been through 4 hurricanes personally.
Yeah.
A lot of. I got a lot of experience in different areas, and that's why I've seen the global pollution crisis, and that's why I'm speaking to talk about what I've seen, what's done right, what's done wrong, and how we can make a difference. Because I have like not only education, but like real world experience. In
Right.
seeing-
No, definitely.
I'll be open to questions, so hopefully people can present those questions. That's going to benefit this group the best that it can, with what I know and what I've learned.
It's a very different question. Like we're just sitting in comfort zones and like, oh, well, we should do it. Kind
There's
of.
learning, school, and applying.
Yeah. Definitely.
And I'm 37, so I think I'm generally a little older than the people in the youth.
Yeah.
They're probably 27.
Yeah. No, I'm 22.
22. Okay.
Yeah, but at least in Germany, most people are rather young
Okay.
because we leave school rather early and right at the university.
Yeah. Unlike in America.
Well, actually, as I was in the States just recently, and what I found was you leave school, the high school early, but you've got,
College is long.
yeah, it's really, really long. And it's incredibly expensive on top of that.
So sometimes people take breaks in between the work,
Yeah,
and they
no,
take, like me, it took longer for me to go to school.
Of course.
So you think the average person here is
I would think something like 25. Although I mean I don't know that many people, but most people are probably in a master's degree. So I would guess about 25. It's difficult to say because it's got to be. It looks incredibly but I've done some research on. I think it's a joint program between culture. So I think it's in Geneva. I think. So yeah, it's UNAP. It's joint program between UNAP and the UN Human Rights program.
I don't know as much about it. We all know so
Oh
much.
right, no, definitely.
I didn't study that.
No, it's just. Oh yeah, I'll have to like that. Thanks.
Good. So, welcome back. We are a bit ahead of time. I think this is fine for you as well because you have a 15 minutes longer lunch break. I think this is appreciated in this regard, so that's why we are doing this. And I also like that all of you are using your reusable coffee cup. So we are going to start with the water panel. I hope everybody of you has prepared a lot of questions, tricky questions. And yeah, I think, a round of applause. Miss Lee, Mr. Schulz, Mr. Kovac, and Mr. Andresen. Right? So, we have here the International Atomic Energy Agency, the head of Water Institute from Boku. We have from an ICPR pollution expert, and we have from UN Environment, Magnus. So I don't want to introduce yourself because I think everybody can read what is written on your booklet and also on the website. So, and also I think you will forget it immediately. So I think it's better to start directly, not wasting time. So please, Adam, we start with your presentation.
Chair, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Adam Kovac. I work at the ICPR Secretariat and I'm a technical expert on pollution control. It's also a great challenge to be here because I have the pleasure to summarize in 50 minutes what is ongoing in a basin with 800,000 square kilometers. So if you want to replace me, be my guest. But that is why I just chosen one particular issue, which is the urban wastewater management in the River Basin. You will see why later on. I mean, this is an area we are quite active. We achieved some progress, but still a lot to be done. So I can also show you both progress, but also challenges in terms of wastewater treatment. And the funny thing is that the wastewater is really all kind of pollution, organic nutrients, hazardous stuff, and others. So it's a nice combination of covering the problems. My colleague Ellen, she was here to give you the introductory speech. I think she mentioned the river basin management, what the ICP is doing. So we are an international organization. We do transboundary water management, and these products we are developing, we are in line with the requirements of the Water Framework Directive and the Floods Directive. And the key documents we are developing is the River Basin Management Plan, the Flood Risk Management Plan for the Danube River Basin. And these are some results from the last document, the reference is 2015. And you see here the status of the surface water bodies in the basin, ecological status and chemical status. Chemical status, you see, we are quite in a good status. You see that around 2/3 of the river basins or river water bodies are in good status. It's not that much the situation for the ecological status. You see that for 25% we have good status, but there is another part of the cave which is not good. So we still have to work on that. You also look at the future, and we assess the risk of not achieving the requirements and goals of the WFP by 2021. And you see here that for chemical, the bigger part is not at risk, but for ecological status, is still 50% of the water bodies are at risk of not achieving the good status. And if we link those problems to pressures, you see that the pollution is still an issue. You see that the organic pollution, nutrients, and the hazardous substances very much influencing our waters, and those risks are related very much to these pressures with the pollution. So we can say that for the Danube River Basin, we identified 3 so-called significant water management issues, SWIMIs, as a nickname, it's easier to pollution, basically biodegradable substances. Nutrients pollution is not a frog, it's nutrients that make your lake and coast areas like a spinach. And then we have hazardous substances which are in very small concentration, they can really cause very serious health issues, and also for the biodiversity and also for the human. As I said before, those three are related to the inappropriately treated wastewater. So wastewater is one issue that we have to deal with in the basin, especially because we have a lot of people living in the river basin. So therefore, we have a vision for the wastewater management or treatment, and this is the zero emission. So we don't want to see that picture. We don't want to see untreated wastewater, direct discharge of wastewater into surface water bodies, because this is a serious pollution we have to avoid. So we expect that the wastewater is collected either by sewer systems or by small scale appropriate treatment facilities. And then there is a appropriate or adequate treatment. At least secondary treatment is biological treatment, but in some cases, even more stringent or more enhanced treatment is required, especially with regard to nutrient removal or nutrients and hazardous substances pollutions. It just indicated on graph one issue which is related to the BOD, or the organic pollution, is the oxygen depletion, and the oxygen balance of the surface water bodies might be thoroughly affected if this wastewater is untreated. So you see here how the oxygen concentration, direction I'm going in, I know. Apologies. Almost there, presently. No. Now I'm concluding, so it was a pain. Can I go there? So, I'm losing oxygen too. Here we go. So you see here, okay, we decided, so the oxygen said how the oxygen concentration is decreasing downstream of a treatment or a treatment plant or untreated wastewater discharge, and then it becomes better again because of the reaeration of the oxygen in the water. Now the good direction. So this is what we had in the past. This is 2005, and you see down here 6,000 agglomerations. Blue is good, green is also good-ish, the red and brown is not good. Yeah. So here you see this is the situation. Upstream countries, basically Germany and Austria, they are the pioneers. They have started the wastewater management decades before. And as we go downstream, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, they are in the middle, and then the rest of the downstream countries are lagging behind. What happened in the last, let's say, over 7 years, I mean, between 2005 and 12, you see here that we have a quite nice shift towards the good colors, thanks to the investments and the measures that have been implemented in the sector. But before explaining more, just let me bore you with some numbers, just to have you an impression what we are doing and what the problem is. But we have a quite nice population, 90 million population equivalent, at least approximately 6,000 agglomerations, above 2,000. So this means that the daily wastewater discharge is about 10 million cubic meters. Quite a high number. But what we saw that recently there is a clear improvement in the wastewater infrastructure at around 900 agglomerations. So this is something we have to emphasize. This is quite progress. The 900 projects, and another 10 is ongoing. 1,000 is ongoing. So a large number of agglomerations we achieved progress. And also we see this shift to more enhanced technologies, from nothing to the biological treatment or the nutrient removal. And also almost half the organic substances, 50% BOD discharge we have less in comparison to the two reference years. We have also 30% and 45% less nutrient, total nitrogen, total phosphorus discharges because of the nutrient removal we implemented. But still we have a lot, 250 tons BOD per year, which is discharged from the treatment plants and sewer systems. We have also 90,000 tons total nitrogen and 12,000 tons phosphorus per year, which are released from those point sources. And I'm not talking about my agriculture, which will also give some nutrients to the overall picture. This is just the point sources we still have. This is an interesting picture because it shows that it's 2/3 of grain is just the collected wastewater, which is collected by sewers and then put into the river without any treatment, right? So this is raw wastewater discharge, and you see this is responsible for 2/3 of the emissions. So if you can somehow address those sewer systems which have no treatment, then we can significantly cut the still existing pollution. This is the country performances, and I said before that there is a kind of unbalanced picture in the basin. As you see here, if you compare the population equivalent specific emissions, you see here that which countries are quite good, and other countries, I don't want to name anyone, but you see, right? So some of the middle and the downstream basin are not too enhanced. So this is a big potential for them to improve the situation. And this leads to me to the future, where the development needs are. And this is the population equivalent distribution among the different categories of treatment. Brown is no collected and no treated. This is the worst case, but not for the surface, but for the soil, because the wastewater is just collected and then a cesspool or a septic tank is installed somewhere around the property, and then the wastewater is stored and somehow released there. Don't ask me how, okay? I'm Hungarian, I know some tricky solutions for it. But you see at the basin-wide level that we have around 20% for the population equivalent which is somehow not collected, not treated adequately. And I said before that, you remember that this wastewater which is collected by sewer and then put to the river was responsible for 2/3 of the emissions, but we only have 10% of population. So if we can cover 10%, we can really significantly improve the situation, because the 10% are responsible for 2/3 of the emissions. So this is something for the managers to bear in mind. As you see here, the brown and the gray colors are really transparent in the non-EU countries. So it's also a message that joining the EU pays off to some extent in terms of wastewater management. But still, there are, even for EU countries like Slovenia, the new one, Croatia, but then downstream countries which are not EU member states yet, they face a really problem that once they want to join the EU, they should also implement the WFD, so they should invest in this sector. The good news, the EU provides money. There are subsidies available from the structural funds, basically the regional development fund and the cohesion funds. And the last lowest financing period, 2007-2013, around 6 billion euro have been spent for wastewater treatment. You can ask, is this much or not? I can say that in Serbia, if the whole country wants to comply with the requirements of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, they should spend 5 billion euros. Bosnia, 2.5. This is just two countries. One treatment plant size of Bucharest or Budapest, 2 million people, costs you €500 million, plus minus. So maybe this 6 billion is too much, I don't know, you can judge it. But we see that if we want to comply with the requirements, we need basic infrastructure development for 25 million people for population equivalent. Basic means sewer system and the very, very basic biological treatment. On the other hand, we also need at some places nutrient removal. Maybe you heard about the Black Sea. This is sensitive for eutrophication. Therefore, the entire basin has been designated as a sensitive area. That means all agglomerations above 10,000 should have nutrient removal. And this is now missing for almost 30 million people. So again, this is just to put out of the Black Sea. And as I mentioned before, somehow evidence that in these countries there is a great potential for reduction, but they need to have money. They need to fund the sources. Of course, EU cannot cover everything. It's co-financed, but then it's something on the national governments to find the money and also to approach other financial institutions, World Bank and investment bank to have loans or grants. They also, again, the future. So this is now the situation more or less now. I mean, you can say it is before, but this is the last assessment what we've done. So it's still considered as a current situation. You look at the future, and the future in 2021 should look like this. So you see again, this was now, basically, and you see, oops, a lot of blue dots are appearing, which means that those countries like Romania and Bulgaria, they are fully in compliance with the directive requirements. Also see the problems still there in non-EU countries. We foresee that, around 50 million people will be connected by 2021 to sewer systems and treatment, and another 60 million to be upgraded, so the technology will be improved. And this will result in around 40% further emission reduction. This is the situation, but the question is, you might ask me, what the hell the countries are doing on that? So one issue is what you have to understand that the ICPDR, we are not authority. We cannot enforce that these countries will do that. And the ICPDR is not a bank. We don't have those billions of euros to give them, so we don't construct anything. This is completely in the hand of the countries. And they have to comply with two basic and very important directives. One is the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, very demanding one, and the second is the Industrial Emission Directive. And the first requires constructing appropriate wastewater collecting systems for sewers and wastewater treatment plants, while the other one should or requires or prescribes to introduce the so-called best available techniques at the industrial facilities, so they have to be, let's say, modern and up to date. This was what countries really should do, and what ICPDR can help them, and how we assist them. As you saw, we develop an inventory for the assessments on the technological and environmental status. So we regularly update this inventory, these maps, and we try to elaborate the current situation, and also compare the former ones to see progress. And we also try to orient those financial institutions and workshops where the investments are really needed. So this can help them to identify where they should be active. But it's not only money. So many times the money is there, but the country is not able to absorb the money. So we see a massive lack of capacity in all spectrum in this management, wastewater management. National administration, local administration, others utilities, how to develop a bankable project proposal. They don't know in many countries. How to implement the project, how to run a business in wastewater management, how to operate the treatment, how to optimize energy consumption, how to treat sludge, how to reuse wastewater. These are the issues which should be discussed, and the capacity of those I mean, we need a workforce which is skilled, right? Not just at utilities, but also administration level. The mayor who has to ensure that the wastewater is collected, they have no idea which system is good or bad. If you have a smart company, you can sell whatever technology you have because they don't know about the details. So this is, of course, they need experts. No mayor will know about it, yeah, right? But still, they need to find somehow this information. We also promote enhanced technologies. Maybe you know that in Switzerland, the biggest 100 treatment plants, they will have the force technology, which is fighting the hazardous substances, the pharmaceuticals, the hormone residues, and these kind of stuff, organic chemicals. In the Danube Basin, we just started discussing this. Even Germany, the richest country, or Austria, they're still a bit reluctant to do so because it's very expensive. Okay, you can say that Switzerland is another issue. Okay, I mean, these are low. I mean, they agree that 100 because there's a low. We will see what the future might be in the Danube Basin, but this is a discussion which is ongoing. And this leads me, hazardous the last point, how to close knowledge gaps. I told about BOD and the organic substances, nutrients, but we don't know too much about the hazardous substances. How much organic chemicals are released? There's no statistic on that, and very few measurements. So this is an issue, an area which we have to really improve our knowledge. We just a couple of months ago we undertook a targeted monitoring campaign on its both wastewater treatment plants in the basin, and we went for organic chemicals, emerging substances, because this is not known at all. Regarding the capacity strengthening, in December we had a workshop, and we brought together national administration, local administration, utilities, to at least start discussions and to understand what the needs are, and organizations like us, how can we help them. So we want to develop a sort of basin-wide strategy for the wastewater management. And now the conclusions, which are the scenes, so maybe I can skip it. The first message is what you might take home, or you might forget, but I hope that you might take home, is that there is a progress. So significant efforts have been done to reduce these substances, pollutant or discharges by implementing measures. So there are investments in the sector. The second one is this led to a lower pollutant emissions in municipalities in comparison to the past decades. So this is the good side of the coin. But still, we see the need of additional actions in the next management cycle in measure implementation. One is, as I said, huge investment on the sewer systems and treatment plants, but we shouldn't forget the maintenance. In Austria and Germany, this is a main issue because they have sewers and treatment plants everywhere, even very small aggregation. But the question is how to maintain the operational quality. And the final point, I guess, is, as I said before, we need to further reduce knowledge gaps, specifically on hazardous substances emissions, and also we need to strengthen the capacity of both the administration and the utility level. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. We are going to continue with you, Mr. Carsten, and it's more about water management, I guess. But I stay focused. I also haven't had a glance at the presentations in advance, so I'm also always very curious.
So, while the presentation is coming up, I'd like to thank you for inviting me here and welcome everybody here in this room. It's very nice to get some kind of applause at the beginning of a presentation. If you work at university, that often happens, so maybe at the end, if everybody's happy, that they can leave the room again. As I was introduced, I'm a catchment hydrologist, so I'm heading at the moment the Institute of Water Management, Hydrology and Hydraulic Engineering at Boku University, and I was asked to just present a few aspects of my research, of the research we are doing at Boku, and I've realized it nicely fits into what the IPCDR was actually presenting, and I hope it's also of interest for the broader audience here. So as a hydrologist, I'm very much interested in the hydrological processes going on within the catchment, so precipitation, infiltration process, evapotranspiration, river runoff processes in general, and with that it's a very interdisciplinary area of research anyway, because you have to deal with meteorologists, you have to deal with plant ecologists because of root water uptake, interception, storage. Nowadays, you even have to work with sociologists and urban scientists because of interaction between these different systems. Going back, as a water resource manager, I have to be interested in issues like flood risk management. I have to deal with hydropower generation, which is for Austria one of the main electricity producers. Of course, we have to deal with the issue of water quantity and water quality, and that is especially linked to IPCDR. but also with agriculture, irrigation problems. There was just last summer a newspaper article saying, should the Maffei area take 30 cubic meters per second from the Danube for irrigation problems? So water is pretty central for many different other areas, and complex enough at this stage, but it's getting more complicated now when we think about external pressures that we have to deal with, like climate change. We have land use change issues that are often driven by sea policies, and we have the situation of urbanization and thinking about how this impacts the hydrological systems, how we can save water quantities and qualities, and how to deal with flood risk management. And that's basically the area we are doing research in, and these are the areas we are providing, hopefully some information, some helpful guidelines, and some tools, and bridge some of the knowledge gaps that are necessary. I would like to introduce two of these areas in, let's say, on a few slides in some details. The first is related to water resources and water quality. And that's a current, these are results or some information just from a current and a just started project with the Austrian Climate Fund. When it comes to, let's say, dealing with the consequences, with the impacts of global change issues, we have this typical chain of having these pressures, and then we look at the impact these pressures have on these individual systems. So here on the left-hand side, illustrated climate has an impact on the water and nitrogen cycle, just as examples. And in order to estimate what kind of impact we have to deal with, or which measures might function or work or have an impact in what direction, we are heavily building on the use of numerical models. So we have models where we can predict climate changes. We have models that can predict, given these changes in the pressures, on the water resources, on the nitrogen cycle, on whatever you can think of. So there are almost models everywhere for all these situations, and we have to look at them. There's not only climate change, as I said, so in our project we looked for Austria also at the possible impacts of land use change and also at urban development, and what kind of impact those have on the water cycle and the N and phosphorus transport within headwater catchment of the Danube. So actually this is relevant for the Danube and the IPCDR, what we're doing here. Let's just look at some of these concrete components. So in terms of climate change, we cooperate or collaborate with the ZAMK, with the Austrian what's that called? Meteorological Services of Austria. This group, given climate change scenarios, and this is already just a single word for a long chain of processes going on, like you can see here on this left-hand side. So you have to produce RCP scenarios, that was earlier named emission scenarios. You run global climate models, GCMs, you nest in regional climate models in order to get down to the regional scale, to smaller scales. For hydrologists, you have to deal with bias correction issues and so on. So it's a whole processing chain before you actually get here some of these scenarios which will give you temperature changes, mean temperature changes, precipitation changes over the east of Austria, and here you see the two catchments we were looking at. So that's something ZAMK was doing in this project, and which is a very general procedure when you do these impact studies. What you also see is here that you get a range of very different behavior. So it's not a single prediction you always get. You have to deal with a range of predictions, and you have to consider these uncertainties in your decision-making process. That's in a nutshell with climate change. It's a huge discipline you have to work with. Urban development, something as important sometimes as climate change, because with population increase, so we look at population development, you have sealing of surfaces, runoff production, that have an impact on the water cycle. You have the wastewater treatment plants, they will change in the efficiency in the future. And also you have these water quality data where you actually monitor the efficiency. And using those information for these two catchments, we came up with some scenarios how the input of nitrogen and phosphorus into these streams in these catchments might change over the next 20, 30 years. Again, you can already see there lots of guesses, lots of assumptions, lots of uncertainties in the process, and that's again indicated here by this triangle. And last but not least, we have land use to deal with. Again, here we use also different scenarios, how land use characteristics might change. We analyzed here the business as usual, which we could take here from just temporal trends in the past, and we just took them forward in time, or we used a more precise measure, a set of measures that might be taken in different catchments that change farmer behavior significantly, and again, came up with different fertilizer use and thereby emissions into the soil and into the water cycle. Yeah, with that, so okay, I didn't. With those scenarios, let's say a boundary condition, then we feed our water and nitrogen and phosphorus models, so the impact models. You can, wherever discipline you are looking at, they might look at slightly different form of impact models, but in a nutshell, in a very broad principle, this is the process you go through in climate change or global change analysis. And we did that here with a model that's called SWOT, soil water assessment tool, to do that in a mechanistic way, in order also to map different agricultural measures, behavior of farmers, agriculture, irrigation, and nutrient use practices in the different catchments. And when you do that, and you can already imagine it's a lot of effort, because you have to go through all these variations, through all the uncertainties, and through all the scenarios, you come up with, and I'm not considering everything here at the moment, you have uncertainties in the models as well, in the parameters, in anything you do for model calibration, but that's another lecture I give in 2 hours, so I don't do it here. But at the end of the day, you get some estimation for the monthly nitrate loads or the specific monthly discharge that's related to the water nitrogen cycle. You can see that here by these dashed lines, but you see also these areas where you get the uncertainties in those predictions. Yeah? And you can do also sensitivity analysis. We have developed here some kind of global sensitivity analysis, where you can actually see the impact, and the more color you see, the more relative sensible is such a parameter or such a scenario. You can actually see at that catchment, under these conditions, climate change scenarios has a huge input on a certain range of data. And for example, land use scenarios, point source scenarios, not that much. Model setup and parameterization, which I didn't talk about, are again of some kind of major importance here. And this you could do for every catchment, and in this way you would analyze the most sensitive, let's say, areas where you actually have to look at in order to get some of the measures right to get the best results. And at the moment we are enhancing that kind of concept, not looking only at nitrate. We also look at trade-offs between nitrate and nitrogen oxide emissions, so gaseous oxide into the atmosphere, greenhouse gases that feed back into the global change or climate change process. All right, so that's one area of research. I hope I have 2 more minutes or 3 more minutes for a second part that's dealing with flood risk management. So this is this area here. And it's a huge topic. Flood risk management under climate change. You find, I think each month you find in Nature some kind of publication, it's Nature, climate change on the global flood risk under climate change, where people look at scenarios, again, how will climate change and what effect do they have on flood risk on a global scale. How are they doing it? So that's a little bit of science now I'm showing you, and I hope you can agree with that. Usually what we do is we have like a time series of runoff data. This is by chance the Danube River at Vienna. But what we do then is we look at the reference period, let's say 30 years, that would be the standard, that's also here in this publication. And by looking at this 30-year window with extreme value statistics, we estimate, let's say, 100-yearly flood. So no Boris in the audience? You're just happy. It's already strange. If you estimate an event that occurs once in 100 years, a 30-year window, you might not see it. Yeah? And that's one of the main issues on the uncertainties in doing this kind of analysis. Then it becomes even better. So then you take your climate model, you get predictions for future precipitation, you run a hydrological model under this scenario, and you get discharge simulations for a future period. And you take those 30 years here, the window, and then you estimate 125 events. And from that you do a trend. And you see here, okay, it's increasing, and that's exactly what was done in this paper, and it was done in 20, 30 other papers that you can see in Science or Nature. The question, and this is, you need, in order to publish in Nature, you need some global aspects, so they do that on a global scale in each catchment of the world, and come up then with nice colored images from return periods for floods. And that's fine, because that's something that's really of interest and nice. But the question is, how robust are these estimates? And what we did was a really very simple example. So I took these Danube data, I took a 30-year window, and I don't have the animation here, but I did the estimation of the extreme value here, of the 100-yearly flood in that window, and I moved that window slowly through that data set and did that at each location. And this is what you get. So this is a 100-yearly flood event for the Danube, estimated from a 30-year window, and you can see how this is changing in time. So, and it's extremely changing. From 11,000 cubic meter we down to 7,000. This 4,000 cubic meter at the Danube. I mean, I would like to ask the IPCDR, so what is that in terms of cost for flood protection? This is billions or millions at least of money we look at, and that's a problem what we have to deal with. So if you now take this time series and look at trends, you get anything. So there's any trend you want in the data depending on which period you take, and what we did additionally, and we got this published, and actually since then, I'm not very much live on conferences anymore, because I show that. I get invited to EC project meetings very often to start a controversial discussion on that topic. So this is what I've gained so far. But I did this kind of exercise with a time series that was, this is an artificial time series, but actually it has all the statistics of the Danube, and we took different other rivers. But there is no trend in the data. I know from because I generated that data, there's no trend in there. I did the same procedure, and I got everything. Every trend you want. Yeah? And this is actually the distribution of all the trends I got from minus 3,000 to plus 3,000 cubic meter per second in 100 years. And that's the statistical uncertainties we have when we look at trend in hydrological extremes under climate change. Yeah? And that's a challenge, and that's a challenge for you. We don't have a solution yet, where you might help in looking at climate change issues beyond those that were presented by the IPCC before. This is the same problem we have ourselves. So, here we are, and I could continue for 2 hours to show you more issues on these kind of analysis I think I have to stop. Thank you very much.
Quite impressive research, I have to admit. Thanks a lot. We continue with you, Lee. I have to shortly introduce you because you haven't been presented on our website. So thanks a lot for your time as well, because she is the head of soil and water management and food nutrition, sub-program of the joint FAO agency deficiency of nuclear techniques in food and agriculture. And what you're mainly dealing with, the applications of nuclear and isotopic techniques in agricultural water management, and you're managing 50 technical cooperation projects. Well, from Asia Pacific, Africa, Europe, Latin America, all over the world, as I can say, as well as 6 coordinated research projects covering topics as soil. I'm also glad that your colleague Joseph will later join our soil panel, and water, nutrient management, and response to nuclear emergency affecting food and agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I get to be introduced because I submitted my short CV only this morning. So it's a blessing in disguise. So thank you for the invitation to be here. My presentation will be, because we are from the joint FAO-IA division, all our projects has to have a nuclear or isotopic component. So here I'm going to briefly give you an introduction on some of the techniques that we use to address some of the topics that we are discussing here this morning. So the outline of my presentation will be a brief topic on challenges faced by agriculture and what we mean by climate smart agriculture to address some of the challenges, and some of the work in our joint division, including our section in the soil and water management, and then some nuclear application on some of the challenges. So we all know that the world faces a lot of challenges, and our 2 previous speakers touched on many of the problems: land degradation, soil erosion, water scarcity, and water use efficiency problem, flooding, we just heard, water quality, we also just heard, and abiotic stress like drought, salinity, low nutrient status in many African countries, and how to improve crop nutrition. And since the topic that we are discussing this morning is on water, I leave the soil and the other part to my colleagues in the afternoon. Here, we know that the world population is increasing at a tremendous pace. We can see it is reaching something like 9.6 billion in 2050, and majority of this increase will be in developing countries. So there is a need to produce more food to feed the population, and this gives a lot of pressure on land and how to manage agricultural water, because we need water to produce food. So, and in addition, as our 2 speakers mentioned earlier, there is a lot of problem on water resources. It is becoming more and more limited and more degraded. And examples have been illustrated for the Danube river basin, and how to use modeling to determine that. So I'm not sure you know that agriculture consumes 70% of total fresh water use in the world. So if you have 1 liter or 100 liters, 70 liters is nothing. But the sad news is that the water use efficiency is very low. It's less than 40%. So there is a need to increase the water use efficiency. And this is especially in developing countries where they do not have the means and the capital to do. That's where we come to help. So, I don't have to mention about the water quality problem we just heard from the previous two speakers, that besides nitrogen, there's phosphorus, pesticide, and other organic materials. So, just a brief introduction on our joint division. It is a unique division because we join with FAO, which is Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, in Italy, and IAEA. And so the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Protection in FAO and the Department of Nuclear Sciences and Education in IAEA became our division. And under the division there are 5 sections and we are one of them. And in the sub-program we have the section here in the VIC. We also have a lab in Cybersoft about 40 kilometers away, where we do a lot of R&D and training and analytical services. So if you have a chance after today, if you're interested in our work, I can arrange that some of you can go there for a visit. So, and in our sub-program, and here in the headquarters, we mainly develop instrument and coordinate what we call the coordinated research project. And currently we have 6 of them covering water quality, salinity, nuclear emergency, soil erosion, and greenhouse gas, and crop livestock. So, and then we have like our organizer mentioned 50 technical cooperation, and that a lot of that, about nearly 1/3 is in Africa. So we have a lot of projects in Africa, and they are very interesting, exciting, and challenging. So, and if you're interested to know more, you can come to our website. And in Cybersoft, like I said, we provide analytical support and external quality assurance. We conduct training courses, and we also have R&D where we adapt some R&D methodologies, simplify so that we can transfer them to our member states. So here, basically, we work on 3 topics: soil, water, crop, and nutrition, with the role of nuclear and isotopic techniques. So, and basically, how we work is that we assist member states to use nuclear isotopic techniques and related biotechnologies for sustainable agriculture and food security by supporting and coordinating R&D activities through CRP. And then this CRP are demand-driven or hot topic that we need to address. And then we provide technical support to TC project, and we also have, if they have samples that they don't know where to analyze, we help them to analyze, and then we disseminate all this information. So, and so our section, we address SDG 2, 6, 13, and 15. Is ending hunger and ensure sustainable management of water, or combating climate change, and then land degradation. Then, so FAO came up with this term called climate smart agriculture, CSA, and what does it mean? It means that we need to, it is a three-dimensional approach consisting, we need to consider like, let's say earlier, economic, social, and environmental. We have three components to be for this climate smart agriculture. And here we address both food security and climate change. Like you say, climate change is part of everyday life. So we need to consider climate change. And this is location specific and require knowledge. So you cannot generalize whatever developed in Europe, you think you can apply in Africa. So it's location specific. And then it requires partnership investment, and hopefully through this channel today, we can get some of you to be interested in our project. And then it requires some innovation and R&D activities. So, sounds difficult, but it's possible. And in terms of nuclear techniques, for climate smart agriculture, what does it mean? It is from understanding to action. It means you need, in terms of assessment and evaluation, the impact of climate change on agriculture, as well as the impact of agriculture activities, practices on climate change. Because agriculture is not only the victim of climate change. Agriculture also contributes to climate change. Some 24% of climate change is contributed by agriculture. The excessive use of fertilizer resulting of emission of nitrous oxide, and the animal UV and all that also contributing. So deforestation is also part of the contributing factor. So there is a lot that we need to improve so that we minimize our contribution to climate change. At the same time, we are affected by climate change because in Africa, a lot of drought and extreme weather events are happening, and they are less of a contributor, but they are the receiver of climate change. So they are very distinct and very different. So far, why we use nuclear and isotopic techniques is because it allows us to trace where it is moving or where it comes from. And it, they are stable and radioactive components. In radioactivity, it allows us to induce genetic variation, or it stir some of the food. And then, so this is particularly in our other programs work where we use radiation to induce mutation, so they create a lot of variation in the crop properties, but it's not so much in our work. So it allows us to be measured, and it is accurate because it is know what is and all that is. Whatever you measure is accurate. And it is very specific. Its targeted is for a particular property, then it is there. So it's specific. And so some of you may not know what is an isotope. Literally, if you know, like for example, you have the atomic number 7 and the gas number 14. So this is one isotope. But you see, in nitrogen, for example, you can have the majority is N14, but you also can have N15 because it has 1 neutron more some of the techniques that we use in our sub-program, and we use, I just said, N15, this is a stable isotope, to quantify biological nitrogen situation. This is very important because they do have, with the means of farmers do have the means to buy fertilizer, and the soil is poor. How do we get them to increase soil fertility? And legumes is a good fixer of nitrogen content. How best the legumes fits in this N15 to help them to quantify and to compare which type is the best. So sometimes it's possible that we can produce the best fitting variety through the root knowledge. At the same time, we can use the same isotope to determine the flow and fate of nitrogen fertilizer to improve fertilizer use efficiency. Because sometimes they use too much or wrong time or wrong time, and so the use efficiency may not be optimal. So we use N15 to help them to determine if they are using the right type, the right time, the right quantity. So again, we can use N15. We can also use carbon 13. It allows us to determine if your crop is tolerant to drought, salinity, which we use. And then we can also use oxygen, and the normal one is oxygen 18, but oxygen 16, but oxygen 18 is an isotope of water. Then we can use it to determine the sources of water, and our colleagues from water resources and acid India also I'm sure interested in this. And where also you can use it to determine your evapotranspiration. How much of your total water loss through evaporation, transpiration is transpiration, the part that's used by the crop. Evaporation is the part that's lost from the soil, and then it does not contributing to crop yield. So in many countries, they use the irrigation. A lot of water is lost to evaporation. How can we cut down this? By knowing the proportion of the water loss to evaporation, we can help. So there are many uses. So, and how we can use it? Because a lot of this oxygen 18 in the rainfall has a different signature compared to oxygen 18 of the surface water compared to other types. So there is different signatures that allow you to use mathematical equation to separate this. And so our work in the Philippines, where they compare if you use continuous flooding or alternate wetting and drying, if you can determine how much of your water is lost through evaporation and transpiration. And that allows you to tell this local government that we need to cut down at this stage of the total, and we should go, this is for rice and rice, this is so so now we are using that to determine how much water is lost. Similarly, and oxygen 18 allows you to determine if the water is new or old water. In Libya, a lot of their groundwater is really old water and should not be used for irrigation, but it is being used. So if we can help them to determine if the water is new water, means it can be recharged from the rain or from snow, then this is renewable. If own water, we need to keep, make sure that we keep some of it. So this is very powerful tool that allow you to determine. Finally, we also have soil moisture neutron probe, where it is very suitable under fracking soil or sand conditions. And there, some of our project in Africa, they use this to do irrigation shading. And so we have a project in Sudan, where it was very dry, and we help them to lay drip irrigation system, and they determine how much water is required using the control, and then finally help them to improve their livelihood. Another new method that we are using is called the cosmic ring neutron sensor. And this one, it make use of neutron from our atmosphere that came from cosmic sources. And the good thing about this is it measures water up to 20 feet. Most of our sensors are point sensor. We call them point sensor because only measure maximum 50 centimeters radius. In this case, we can measure up to 20 feet. And this is, and it comes in different forms, stationary, in the rover. The good thing about this is this is point sensor, and the remote sensing is really big, and this seems to fit in the middle. So it is attachment that you need to quantify the soil water status. This could be an option. It's really new, so we are still working on the calibration, validation, and other issues. So it allows you to map the spatial variability of your soil water status. And so we are now trying to see if this sensor can be used for irrigation. So another issue, water quality, is as we touched on, and where here we can help to determine sources of nitrate. For example, nitrate can be from fertilizer, from animals, from industry, and so how do you know where it comes from? This is the key factor in your moisture problem. And so you see 18 in the nitrate and 22 plus because of other components, it can help you to set it. It is from fertilizer, or it is from grain, so it's quite a powerful tool that allows you to determine sources. And then, so this is the same, and we use this in Myanmar. Myanmar, there is a beautiful lake called in the lake, and they have some major tourist place. But recent years, there is cutting down of trees, there is hotel being built by the lake, there is floating vegetation, all kinds of things. So the government of Myanmar came to idea that asked us to help to see if we can help them to determine the sources of the pollution from the lake, as well as to determine how much of the erosion from nearby area and where it comes from. So we help them to found that about how many, majority is from CSSI and some from forest management. So they are ways that using nutrients so we can help them to determine the proportion of the forest. So, and we had this one sheet that we summarize some of our work and some of the nutrient specific techniques that we use. And I have them here. And just to tell you, finally, you know, I'm running out of time. We work with FAO on upper crop model to predict new response to water. And here are the adaptation. I have mentioned in cyber stock. This is what we do, training, R&D, and all that. And we sometimes improve methodologies such as here. So that's it. This is our website, and you can learn more. And we also develop a lot of so-called infographic, and you can find it here. And thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for this elaborated presentation. I didn't know how much can fit in 50 minutes. It was a bit longer than 50 minutes, never mind. So coming to the last presentation from UNEP. Now we are leaving the crop fields and going into the mountain regions. I'm looking forward to a journey to the Andes and back to Vienna.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so like David said, I'm going to talk to you a bit about mountains and a work that we do in the Andes regarding water and climate change in particular. So yeah, the UN environment, we just changed our name from UNEP. And yeah, our task is to be the voice and consciousness of the environment within the UN system. And in the context of this, the office here in Vienna focuses on mountain areas in particular. So, yeah, I focus on mountains and climate change. I wanted to give a concrete example from the Andes and how some of the more technical aspects that we just heard about translate into policy, and in particular strategies for climate change adaptation on the regional level in the Andes. So just to kind of tell you a bit about the basics and the connection between mountains and water. So of course, there's a very clear connection in that as clouds move upward in elevation, they cool down. And so a lot of rainfall happens in mountains. And so around half of the world's fresh water come from mountain areas. And as you can see, there's a map of South America, and the Andes is a very good example of how this works in practice, because well, the clouds generally move from east to west across the continent, and as the clouds reach the Andes, which is a very high mountain range, going to around 6,000 meters in every country along the range, it falls down as rain, and it creates the Amazon basin on the eastern side. And then on the western side, you get some of the driest areas on the planet, and the Atacama Desert. And now here are some of the other mountains. So we work not in all of them, but focus mainly on developing mountain areas, like the Hindu-Kush Himalaya, where you have major river basins like the Yangtze or the Ganges, East African mountains, in the East African Rift area that you can see around Kenya, Ethiopia on the map, and then Central Asia, Caucasus, and the Andes. So in the Andes, there's a very big difference in how seasonality of rain works than how it works here in more temperate areas. So you have very clear rainy and dry seasons. And you can see on the map the red areas in the south are areas where you have 50% of the rain falls in just a 3-month period of the year, which very much affects how the water is managed in these areas. And in the north, around Colombia, Ecuador, there's less clear differences between rainy and dry seasons. And there's a lot more water in general. So this is kind of determined by the tropics. So the inner tropics are around Ecuador or Colombia, and as you move north into Venezuela, you have more drier areas, and then when you go south to Bolivia, Peru, you also get drier areas. And this, you can see on the map, the red areas where they have significant unavailability of water, so lacking water in parts of the year. And of course, a lot of human activities, economic activities depend on this water. Hydropower, you can see on the graphic there, is a large proportion of the electricity produced in the Andes. And mining requires a lot of water, agriculture, and sanitation, of course. And out of this around 60 million people who live in the Andes, a lot of them are small-scale farmers that rely on unimproved irrigation and rely very directly on how the climate is operating. And now, under climate change, the conditions of precipitation and temperature in the area will be completely unprecedented. So the warmest years that we see today in the Andes will be the coldest years that we will see in 100 years' time, regardless of what emission scenario you look at. And yeah, another important area for water management, beyond water resources, is also water-related natural disasters. So this includes floods, flash floods, droughts, glacial lake outburst floods, as well as effects on erosion and landslides. And all these natural disasters happen very frequently in mountain areas. They have very steep topography, which of course is the source of a lot of these disasters. And many of you might not know what a glof is, but a glof, you can see a picture here of an example of a glof that happened in Peru. And basically what it is that you have a glacier that is melting, so you're creating a lake just beneath the glacier. And this lake can be held in by sand and gravel and ice that has been created by the glacier over time. And if these dams burst, then this can create enormous destruction. And this particular example caused the death of around 5,000 people in Huaraz in Peru, as there was an avalanche falling into the lake, causing the dam to burst and crushing towns and villages below. Sorry, when was that? 1941. Now, beyond these immediate destructive events, of course, droughts also cause a lot of suffering, especially in poor communities, of which there are in the Andes. And yeah, as we can see on these graphics, some of the areas that experience the most droughts, like the southern parts and the northern parts of Venezuela, are the areas which will become even drier in the future. And you can see also that some of the areas already have too much water in parts of the year, like in Ecuador and Colombia. It will be even wetter. So some of the characteristics of the region will just be exacerbated, and some of the problems that we've seen till now will become even more problematic in the future. And this is also true for the seasonality. So what we've seen so far in the climate change we've observed until now is that dry seasons have become longer in the south, and the rainy seasons are becoming shorter. And when the same amount of water falls in a shorter period of time, of course you have higher risks of floods and extreme events like that. And you also have a higher risk of droughts on the other end. And basically how this works is not only kind of direct changes of climate and precipitation patterns, but also indirect effects that climate change has on ecosystems, glaciers, and these other natural environments that affect the hydrology of the mountains. So for example, the obvious change that we see is the melting of glaciers, reduction of snow cover, and whilst glaciers, there's not so many glaciers in the Andes, and we're in the tropics of the world in general, but around 99% of the glaciers that do exist in the tropics are in the Andes. As you might not already know, the glaciers that exist in East Africa are almost gone already, and we're seeing a similar kind of drastic reduction in the glaciers in the Andes. And we're also seeing drying of grass and wetlands. And both glaciers, snow cover, and wetlands in the mountains, they serve a very important role in storing water when it's raining heavily and releasing it continuously. There isn't a clear difference between winter and summer in the Andes, but when you have rainy seasons, you get an accumulation of snow that is then constantly melting, and it's also providing water in the dry seasons. Now, it's very specific which areas rely currently on glacial melting water, but a good example is, for example, La Paz in Bolivia, where in parts of the dry seasons, around 30% of the water that comes to the city, well, not in dry season, but in extremely dry periods of dry season, up to 30% of the water that is used in the city comes from glaciers melting. And the glaciers that are still in the Cordillera Real, just above the city, are disappearing very rapidly. And so in the future, this effect of cushioning the dry seasons will not be there, so they have to find different solutions to address this. And of course, like we've heard, we will have increased evapotranspiration, which will also kind of broadly affect water availability. And what's important also to look at when we're looking at climate change effects and the effects of the changing ecosystems, on the one hand, we also need to look at the socioeconomic situation in the countries, in that there's an increase in population, there's high urbanization, which means that there's a concentration of demand for water resources. So for example, going back to La Paz, the city is growing very rapidly, people moving from the countryside or from mountain areas into the city, which increases the need for water, while at the same time we're seeing that there will be less water available in dry season. And this of course particularly affects poorer communities and people who rely on agriculture, for example, which has a very direct impact from climate change and from lack of water. Now, what we're doing about this is basically supporting the countries in creating policies and strategies on the basis of the science that my colleagues were able to explain a lot better. And we focus on synthesizing the available science and creating policy recommendations. And then lastly, bringing all these countries together. So in the various regions of this project, and focusing on the Andes, we're bringing all the countries that share a border with these mountain areas together to develop strategies and plans on how to address it. And this project, as you can see on the map, focuses on East Africa, Indo-Christian Malaya, up here, Central Asia there, Caucasus, Western Balkans, and the Carpathians. And this policy process is continuously ongoing in all these regions. And the Andes is the region we've come the furthest, so we now have a strategy developed with all the countries, and I will show you a little bit about how that is done in practice and what that strategy looks like. So first of all, we created these reports, synthesizing the science that's been done, glacier melting data, climate change projections, and so on. And this is the report for the Andes. And on the basis of this information, the countries sat together in 3 meetings over 3 years to come up with concrete steps that they should do both in their countries, on the regional level, and as well, and also to kind of be a basis for international development aid. So for example, like the Green Climate Fund and other climate change mechanisms. So the strategy for the Andes contains these components. Hydrology and water is just one of these, but of course other aspects like agriculture, ecosystems, natural disasters, health, and so on was obviously very much affected by water and changes in water availability. And this is basically the plan that they come up with for the hydrology and water resources section. And of course, like policies in our work, Real Environment, are very broad. They're not very concrete, and it's kind of, you should see them more as a first step and prioritization rather than something that can really be implemented and provide concrete results. But as you can see, there's a significant, the countries recognize a very significant value in protecting mountain ecosystems and protecting ecosystems in general, monitoring ecosystems for them to be able to adapt efficiently to climate change. So you see the first is protecting mountain ecosystems that are related to water, promoting water management on the basin level, which then includes cooperating with the other countries and creating mechanisms for sharing information, having common plans and so on, and also increasing the research and monitoring of course land use changes, climate change, and other human affected or human anthropogenic processes that affect water. Another more concrete step is expanding hydrological monitoring stations. So in mountain areas, compared to other areas, you need more measurement stations because of the topography, the climate and rain varies more from valley to valley than it does in lowland areas. So you need more data to really understand changes in precipitation and so on in mountain areas. And this doesn't exist because in a lot of mountain areas are very remote. There are very few measurement stations, so we actually have fewer measurements in Andes than we do in the lowlands in South America. So this is a significant problem that needs to be addressed. And also there's a focus on expanding hydrological infrastructure. So like I mentioned, when wetlands and glaciers are no longer serving, as efficiently serving the purpose of storing water, you need to create alternatives. And this could be, for example, water reservoirs and other kind of hard measures like this. Okay, sorry, I'll go. Yeah, and then lastly, I want to say that this was also recognized in the plan is focus on some more socioeconomic factors, and also that we need to make sure that small-scale farmers and poor communities are focused on in particular, and that we create policies that prevent, for example, large hydropower plants and mines to take water that is needed by local communities. This is particularly important as water resources become more scarce in particular areas. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Magnus. As Adam, you have to leave earlier. I thought by 12. Now you have to leave quarter before. I kindly ask you, please address your questions first to Adam and related to the ICPDR. Now, floor is yours. Yeah.
Can you hear me? My name is Anna. I'm from the Diplomatic Academy at the Technical University in Vienna, and I have a question concerning ICPDR. Do you have your own financial resource to support projects as well, or are you just relying on financial resource of the World Bank or EU additionally? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Very limitedly, I would say. So for investments, constructing, we don't have any. But for workshops and capacity strengthening trainings and these kind of activities, we can support. But just to have an impression that our budget is €100,000 from each contracting party per year. So we have 14 contracting parties per the EU, so you can multiply them. This is our budget, and this is also goes for traveling, salaries, renting the UN offices, and also this kind of, so we have a very limited budget. But we do have some EU grants, for instance, from DG Regio, and we have several grants that we receive some money to support the implementation of those directives. So this is what we heavily utilize, those grants. And we have also projects where we are full partners. So, but these are external funding for sure.
Thanks a lot. Just for the procedure, just put up your country tag, country plates, if you have a question. So,
Nigeria.
Yes, that's Nigeria. I just don't, if you don't have a country, yes, just answer, please.
Thanks. Constantine Heiss is my name. Thank you all for your wonderful and very insightful talks. Yeah, thank you. I'd like to pose a question to the ICPR and the UN Environment Program in the Andes. You're both transboundary programs with at very different stages. What were the difficulties in enacting such programs, and how did you overcome this? Especially with the ICPR, with having non-EU countries and possibly also in both programs, with having to deal with people that are not aware of the problems that you're trying to cope with. Thanks.
So, I can go first. So, I think we probably share a lot of similar challenges, but I think particular challenges in the Andes is that a lot of the ministries of environment with whom we work primarily, they don't have much financial resources. And for example, in Bolivia, I guess Bolivia is not represented here today, but Bolivia, they have around 3 people in the Ministry of Environment working on climate change. So they don't have time to look at particular challenges, for example, focusing on mountains and everything. They spend most of their time doing reporting for UNFCCC, for example. So they have very little time to do this kind of research and strategy development on their own. And also another challenge in the Andes is that there isn't really an institution on the regional level to kind of facilitate this kind of cooperation. So we kind of, on some level, have to start from scratch, and you always need to find external funding to bring the countries together, just to organize meetings, for example. So this is not having this kind of institutional framework for international cooperation, like for example the EU here in Europe, or the ICPR, or other institutions like that, is a challenge.
Thanks for the question, and a very good one, I would say. Maybe you know that the Danube Basin is the most international river basin in the world, because in total we have 19 countries, but we have 14 contracted parties because we have a threshold of 2,000 square kilometers. It wouldn't be fair to ask money for Switzerland. There's one tiny creek which is discharged. But the cooperation, it goes back to the early 90s, when these countries realized that there is a need for regional cooperation. Although, as you see in Germany and Austria, they're much developed in terms of investments and infrastructure, while other countries are facing problems. But exactly this is what ICP offers these countries, a platform for the know-how transfer, knowledge sharing. So these countries are really happy to join our meetings because they can learn. The second issue that these countries wants to join the EU sooner or later, and of course joining the EU brings them a lot of let's say requirements in terms of environment and water management. And being part of the ICP and being involved into this work, they can help them to already start implementing those directives and to be prepared for the implementation. But also the EU countries, I mean, when the WFD came into force, nobody really knew what to do with this, how to develop river basin management and how to tackle these issues. So when the Danube countries started elaborating together, it helped the national countries to elaborate their national plans. So this is also an added value that you can then have benefits on the national ground. So this is what also non-EU countries can learn, that how to achieve a better water management, and these international cooperation that can help them to cope with these issues. So this is an added value, and we are, again, we're not just providing platform for discussions, and also the new technologies, how to use several modeling approaches, what the colleague from Boku mentioned. So this is also an information exchange platform where, and that's just one direction, not always from Germany to, let's say, whatever, Moldova, but also the Germans can learn from this. This is also a bilateral or both direction based on exchange. So this is also another value that I would say that help overcome those problems you mentioned.
Is there one last question? So, one. So, two more questions.
Okay, thank you. My name is Adriana Basconi. I'm from the University of Life Sciences here in Vienna. And my question goes to the ICPDR. It concerns the ecological status that you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation. You had data from 2015 saying that I think 38% of the water has an ecological status which is potential moderate or worse. So my question concerns in how far is this due to hydropower development, especially in the downstream regions. Are we talking about big or small hydropower plants? How much is it due to other regulations, other measures, and what's the position of the ICPDR on hydropower, and what is your outlook for the future, for the next years on this? Thank you.
We are going to the more challenging question. The next one might be agriculture. Yes, I mean, you might know that the ecological status is not only some pollutants, it's more than hydromorphological alterations. This is one of the basic feature of the WFT that involves also the hydromorphological and the biological aspects. And we have a lot of problems with hydromorphological alterations. One is hydropower, navigation also to some extent agriculture. And therefore we realized that this should be managed with these sectors. So we started dialogue with the hydropower sector. We have a guidance document on sustainable hydropower. We try to bring together every 2 or 3 years the water sector and the hydropower sector to discuss their needs, what are their needs, what are our needs, and how to find a compromise between the two. We have a similar for navigation. We have an activity in the navigation sector, how to maintain the navigable rivers, which then also good for their benefits, but also still preserves the biodiversity and the hydromorphology. What is true that maybe you know that the sturgeon issue, there's a big, very old, bloody old fish, like a dinosaur in our rivers, and the sturgeon is a migratory fish. That means that between the sea and the freshwater, they like migrating, they need to migrate. But you know that we have a dams, like a hydropower dams, and we have the big ones, the Iron Gate 1 and 2, and now we will run a feasibility study how to ensure that the sturgeon can pass the Iron Gate, not through the turbines, okay? And regarding the small hydropower, maybe you know it in Austria, a lot of small hydropowers exist, also in Germany. But this is again the issue what we occasionally or regularly discuss with the hydropower sector, what the hydropower sector should respect in terms of hydromorphology, and then how can we talk together, how can we work together. You might say that the cooperation is not ideal. That's partly I can admit it, but there are steps in the good direction, and this is what we want to maintain in the future, that these dialogues between the several sectors which are competing from the same water resources, they need to be there, and we have to be act heavily and intensively to bring together the stakeholders. This is also what key feature of the ICPDR has, how to bring the several stakeholders together for joint dialogue and discussions.
So, one last question. Okay.
Hello, I'm Max. I'm from the Technological University in Vienna, and this question goes to the ICPDR. You've actually answered partially my question, but like my first question was, what's the most efficient way to stop desertification, and how does the International Commission for the Protection of the Danube River act in order to stop it? And well, you talked about nutrient removal and about technologies and practices. So could you rephrase like the, let's say, 3 technologies that have to be in order to stop eutrophication?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. For point sources, it's relatively easy. There's a nutrient removal technology. So you can have biological phosphorus removal, denitrification, and also phosphorus specification. This is quite known, so it's not a rocket science that these technologies are very well known. Of course, you need sometimes bigger tanks, or you need to add metals to precipitate the phosphorus, but these technologies are known. But nutrient issue and the eutrophication problem is much more than wastewater. Agriculture plays a critical role, and here I have to mention the so-called nutrient surplus. This is the different imbalance which you add as fertilizer, and then there's a difference between this added fertilizer and the crop uptake. So if you have a large surplus, that means it's ready for mobilization towards water bodies. So the precision irrigation, the precision fertilizer application might be a solution to keep the fertilizer amount at an optimal level. But we have also the so-called buffer zones, and the strip or stripe along the water bodies, mainly from natural vegetation, like a small forest stripe or bushes and grasses, which can also retain nutrients. But also I can mention the natural water retention measures like wetlands and the grasslands, which can also retain water there. The third area I would like to mention is the detergents that you might on the dishwasher and the laundry detergents. They might contain a lot of phosphorus. There's a regulation already at the EU level to promote or to oblige EU countries to introduce phosphate-free detergents. There's also a reduction of the nutrient input to the rivers. But we shouldn't forget also the atmospheric deposition, but it's a bit beyond the water management because it comes from the air and it's all related to combustion processes. So this is in a nutshell.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the last question goes to a fellow colleague from Algeria.
Thank you very much. Thank you all the guests for your fruitful presentations. My name is Neriman and I'm from Algeria. So my question is about the pollution. Pollution, as we all know, is a serious global problem and it's getting worse and worse. And all over the world, there are people and organizations are working to solve that problem by spreading awareness and making some projects. But it's still useless. So, okay, it's still useless. We say preventing is better than treating. Do you agree with me to go to the next level and be more severe and punish countries who cause pollution and make strict laws that must be respected by all the nations? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. ICPDI is not punishing anyone. Just to make it clear that we are not that authority which should do that. But the EU has some means how to enforce countries to implement those measures. Pollution, I mentioned the urban wastewater treatment directive is a very ambitious one. The industrial emission directive, the nitrates directive, the common agriculture policy, the EQS directive on hazardous substances. These are the SEDASO for the accident prevention. These are those pieces of legislation EU countries have to comply with, and they don't, they might face infringement procedure. And then this is a new means. And for instance, Germany recently, they will go to the court because they don't comply with the nitrates directive requirements. But there are some examples. I agree with you on the point on the prevention. That's for sure. And that is why we are active on agriculture, how to prevent, how to optimize the nutrient application. Also, hazardous substances is very much the issue with prevention. So maybe you're aware of the REACH regulation and others on the biocides and pesticides, and they even prescribe to replace some of the hazardous substances to others. So it's not you are not allowed to put products which contain those substances in the market. So these issues which can work in the direction of prevention. Thank you. But the organization like us can do is just, we have some activities, for instance, the guidance document on agriculture or the wastewater initiative, then we want to have a common basic standard in the Danube basin that all the Danube states should respect those standards. This is a kind of framework, then national policy should be integrated into this. Of course, again, we don't have any legal or power or means to force any country to follow us, but the intention is that this is why we have an organization. We don't like this kind of this power, showing of power, but instead of that, we try to cooperate for common issues like the protection of the Black Sea, and then just guess how much nutrients are discharged from Germany to the Black Sea. Probably very little amount because it's quite far, but still Germany does a lot of work to improve the wastewater treatment agriculture. It's not just because of the territorial national purposes, but also to the sake of the Black Sea. So we have a regional, let's say, objective in the basin, and this is the good feature what ICPDR has, that all countries are committed themselves to work together for this. So this is my answer for that.
Thanks a lot, Adam. Yeah, as you have to leave, I think you're already late. Please come to me real quick. As we have been certified as a green meeting, we are pollution free and also paperless event and carbon free, non-carbon offsetting. So we have a reusable cup for you for your coffee.
I need a coffee indeed, yeah.
Here. The USB stick.
Oh, okay.
And get the bag with you.
Thank you very much.
And as I'm a wine lover, I was also taking some journeys through Austria, trying some wine, also some organic Zweigelt for you.
Oh, nice. You made my day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With the presentations, I hope it's okay to put them on Drive so that all the participants have them.
100% transparent. Okay.
Good, perfect. And any other further questions, send them to me and I will forward them respectively to Adam. Okay, so now we continue with the general. So the floor is open and it's great to be always ahead of time because now we still have more than half an hour for questions.
Okay. Hello everyone, this is Vojna, the Vice President of the Bureau of our conference. Thank you so much to all the panelists for your presentation. Mr. Carsten Schulz, you are quite an eminent speaker. Thank you for for sharing part of your research studies, and I wish you good luck in advancing the knowledge. My question to you is how you mentioned that you do set of measurements, different scenarios, soil water assessment, sensitive analysis. How do you communicate the results of these studies to the policymakers if you do? Thank you.
I mean, especially the first part of the presentation, those results are from a project from the Kommunalkredit. I have so often said APCR, Western Planetary Panel, APCR. Yeah. And there, I mean, you have a broader, you have every year you have this actually it's in a few days, there's this yearly meeting where we present those topics, but we also have more open days when we present them. But there is, yeah, not a real proper strategy how to, on a regular basis, involve, let's say, the public. We have once a year there's at Open University there's an open day for science. That's more experimental, so not on these topics you just mentioned. So it's more in different other areas.
Would that make any change if you communicate this research, results to the policymakers?
The second part on the risk, on the flood risk part, this has been presented very often so far, because that's of interest for a large community in climate change impact research. And as I said during the presentation, it's very often a starting point for a very controversial discussion on the topic. So within the, let's say, EC policy or EC project area, yes,
Thanks a lot, Moina, for your questions. My apologies not for introducing you earlier. You're backing me up on the moderation. Nevertheless, I kindly ask you to refrain from questions because they are first from the participants to ask. So, Japan, please, you have been recognized.
Hello, thank you for your insightful presentation. My name is Rebecca and I come from the Technical University of Vienna. I wanted to ask a question to Professor Schultz from the BOKU, and particularly also being in the field of science, I particularly appreciate very critical research on the topic of climate change because it's a very discussed topic and often on one direction, like on the problems and really critical aspects, so having a critical insight on what is actually happening and what we can predict and cannot predict. And I wanted to ask, what can we say that is sure or with a really high security that is a problem and a prediction, and what do we have to say is very unsure, and how can we focus our policies upon these researchers? Thank you.
That's a good question, and that's actually a question that has been, for Austria at least, just a few weeks ago answered by some of my colleagues, Günter Blöschel and a larger group. They have just published the latest project and report on climate change related to hydrology with the Austrian Ministry. So you can actually get that on the web pages and read that. What we can in climate change in general with a more certain degree, and that's related to the IPCC reports and also to the Austrian reports, is everything that has to do with the temperature. So let's say the temperature increase, actually it's supported by historic data, and it's also very consistent within different scenarios to a different extent in different climate change scenarios. So I would call that a pretty robust signal for what we have to expect in the future. Anything that's related to temperature, and that would be snow melt, so the decline of snow-covered area, the change of, and this is, you can observe easily if you walk in any of the mountain regions you were suggesting, or you were introducing, those glacier regions, they decline massively. Yeah? And with that, in the next decade, also let's say the runoff generated by snowmelt will significantly change in amount and also in timing. Whereas more uncertainties involved is in areas that are related to precipitation formation, and therefore also with flood and flood generation. We have historic data, and in that report I mentioned there is an analysis on historic data on Austria. The river runoff has changed, and there are some areas where there is a slightly significant increase, and in summer and in winter there has been a slight change, but it's very moderate from the observational data at the moment, and very uncertain, and there's hardly any really, let's say, robust prediction of what happens and will happen in the next 50 years. for Austria at least. There are some hints, and there is some let's say physical principle that you could use to argue. There's an increase in temperature, so with the warming of the atmosphere, you will have more water vapor in the atmosphere. That will maybe with changed patterns of pressure patterns and air movement might also lead to significant changes in let's say rainfall amounts and intensities. We have observed some change in let's say the overall precipitation and evapotranspiration in the historic data for Austria in the range of, I think in the report it's 18 millimeters per year on average. But again, and the precipitation-related parameters are more uncertain than the temperature-related. One reason, for example, especially in the prediction part, is that for the prediction we use climate models, and they have a certain spatial resolution, and this spatial resolution is now slowly getting into a range where we can resolve convective events. So otherwise it had to be parameterized, and especially in the global climate models, and that is again a very uncertain procedure to do.
Thanks a lot, Iraq.
My question goes to Mrs. Tang. As you work with isotopes and nuclear technology, I wanted to ask if this is compatible with organic agriculture, and if we shouldn't focus more on organic agriculture and permaculture, because this is, I think, a lot better for the planet and for soil.
Thank you for the question. Organic agriculture and isotopic techniques actually has there's no problem in that. And in fact, you can use isotopic techniques. For example, the N15 stable isotopes to determine if what you are buying is organic or not. Because organic products are much more expensive, and they are farmers who may cheat, and they use chemical fertilizer and produce the produce and claim as organic. And if you use N15 fertilizer, you can tell if they're using animal manure or organic fertilizer to increase, to grow the crops, or they are actually using chemical fertilizer. I'm not sure I answer your question, but actually there is no problem with isotopic techniques in organic farming. In fact, it can enhance your or help you to determine if they are real organic products.
Thanks a lot. I don't know if I can trust it, but I trust you, of course, with organic and nuclear technology. Nevertheless, the colleague in the back, please.
Hello, my name is Christoph. I'm a PhD student in the field of water resources management. I have a question to Professor Schulz. Thank you for your presentation. I really liked your slide about the trend. Maybe we can discuss this later. So this is not my question. My question is, how do you see the reality of water resources management? Are the decision makers and the reservoir operators aware of this complex model chain you described? And are they aware of the uncertainty? And then I've got a second question.
I'll try first to answer the first question. I mean, I cannot speak for all stakeholder or interest groups in water resources management, but at least for hydropower, I can say that where we cooperate intensively with the Verbund AG, that there's a huge sensitivity for all that. So they of course, they fund projects, and that are all related to especially these issues. They start running at least ensembles in order to address the uncertainties in the climate inputs. They're interested in long-term climate change effects that they have to deal with in the future. And also looking at least part of the chain, the uncertainty in the impact part. I would say yes, Verbund, yes. water resource management and water quality, IPCDR, maybe not to that degree I was presenting, but at least it's in their mind and it's in their focus. I would the problem I'm facing more is when I talk about uncertainties in the prediction. So people are actually aware of these change and that there are several models and I have measurement errors and all that. The problem is more what they do or how they deal with the final product. If you come up with some of these uncertainty bands and how to deal with that. And that's very often where you are faced with the real, I would call it, engineering situation where they want one value to decide if that's good or not. And then you suddenly give them or they get some ranges and then it's not clear what to do with that. And I think that's something that has to be implemented and developed slowly.
Then the second question is maybe also to the whole panel. Are we facing a water crisis, or what do you think? Are we facing a water crisis in terms of water amount, or are we facing a crisis in terms of mismanagement?
Well, I mean, in kind of absolute terms, the amount is there from all intents and purposes, but yeah, I think it very much depends on the area. Like some areas in the Andes will clearly have a problem with the amount, but now, as it stands, it's generally a management problem. And I mean, a lot of water is wasted in like old water infrastructure, like pipes leaking. There's a lot of like sort of land use management that could be improved to reduce pollution as well as increase the availability of water where you need it. Now, but it's a complicated question, but I think generally, kind of naively, the amount is there in most cases. But yeah. I think essentially it's a question of management systems.
Thank you for this very interesting topic in conference. My question would be, if we look at the crisis or the water sources from a positive aspect, has this led to new ways of agriculture methodology, or maybe have you in Boko, for example, discovered or tried to find some solutions like permaculture or other technology that can maybe help in tackling the issue of water scarcity? My name is Aladdin from Smart Academy.
Yeah, for example, in Africa, there is a lot of water wastage, and they do a lot of flood irrigation. And through our project, we help them to compare whatever their way of irrigating. Sometimes it's bucket, and they just take from 5-6 kilometers, and what they do is they just pour the water over the land. So it's a lot of energy and effort, but the way they irrigate is very good. And so we help them to change their method of irrigation, and it helps to reduce the amount needed and increase yield. And that's the same in West Asia, Middle East. A lot of flood or full irrigation that we help them to, that was many years ago, to convert into fertigation and irrigation with drip irrigation and fertilizer application, and that minimizes a lot of water use and enhance productivity.
I mean, you mentioned directly Boko. I don't know what each of the institutes directly does, but I think there is research on irrigation in general and the use of, for example, drip irrigation. And my belief is that it's not that much the technique, more like Adam said and mentioned, it's the technology to use is there. It's the way how you're going to spread that information, how you make like socio-economical measures ready that this will be applied at the right place at the right time. I think that's more a problem. I tell my students, I do hydrology classes and it's about water management, and I say, from a hydrological point of view, very often it's very clear or relatively clear, and it's more about economical, psychological, socio-economical issues that you have to deal with. So a good water manager doesn't necessarily need to be a really good hydrologist in a way. It's more a combination of these 3-4 areas I mentioned before. So, or knowing a lot of the culture of a certain society might be more helpful than being an expert in numerical models of climate change or whatever.
The gentleman.
I have a question for Mr. Anderson. You mentioned that one of the problems is that you do not have the means to implement stricter policies or give more than general recommendation to the countries in South America. Isn't it possible, as far as I know, there is a very good regional collaboration on the human rights level in the Americas. Isn't it possible to cooperate with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, since the lack of water can prevent the people from living most of their human rights?
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think you could attach these environmental issues to kind of environmental rights, or right to water, or right to pollution-free soil, or whatnot. That's definitely an approach you could take, but I think one issue with that is that the countries oftentimes will be very skeptical to be bound by particular stringent rights, environmental rights. So I think part of the reason why we were able to create this common strategy is also that it is a bit vague. I mean, it's easier to come to the table and agree to something that doesn't oblige you to kind of concrete things, even though we would maybe like to. And since the kind of institutional infrastructure on these issues and on like basic things like sharing data so on isn't there, we're kind of starting from a not so developed policy landscape. So it's kind of necessary to make these basic prioritizations and agree on basic focus first, and then move to more concrete obligations and policies. If that answers your question.
Okay, Pinto, please. Yeah, thank you. My name is Pinto. I'm from Indonesia. I'm curious about the nuclear technology implementation. Have you ever faced resistance from the local community during the implementation phase? Because when we're talking about nuclear technology, normally people might be kind of scared, like, especially like in the village or less education or something like that. So, would you tell me about like how you deal with that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's a good question. Yeah, even though most of our work is dealing with stable isotope, there is no safety and hazard. So there is always, when you hear about the word, you get scared. But the good thing is our counterpart, they are mainly technical people, scientists or technicians, and so when they apply for project, they already have some understanding that they are not going to die or drop their hair. So they, and we also conduct a lot of trainings on this. However, there are some techniques that using radioactivity, that is radioactive. So in those circumstances, before they can start on the project, they have to go through radiation safety and all the training. And so normally then when they do the experiment, this is no problem. But in terms of local people, whatever we do in the research station or in the field, in the farmer's field, it is normally dealing with our counterpart. And normally we don't really, for example, the neutron probe or N15, actually asking the farmers to do. It's mainly the researcher doing in farmers field, because otherwise it's not realistic. And this, so maybe they ran one plot from the farms and they conduct this experiment. And then the information will transfer to the farmers. So in general, we don't encounter this problem.
Thank you. Lady?
Thanks a lot. My name is Stefan Koch from Boku University of Life Sciences, and my question regards the topic of nuclear and isotopic techniques. And I am interested in how this really works, like you mentioned N15, in order to find out the source of nitrate. Is it just about the amount of N15, or what is the information that you really measure?
Thank you. To know the sources, for example, nitrate from in your water, and it can come from fertilizer, can come from animal manure, can come from industry. The good thing is the signature of the N15 from the different sources, they are different. And then not only that, that alone is not sufficient. So you need to know all the oxygen 18 in all these different sources. And sometimes even that is not sufficient. So you need to bring a third element in so that you can clearly separate out where. So it's not so much the amount; it is the signature in the let's say in water or in some solid sample. So that allow you to separate them correctly. So, did I answer the question?
Thanks, yes.
The gentleman in the back.
Thank you very much. My question also goes to Ms. Heng. First of all, I wanted to thank you again for your interesting presentation. I think it's a very interesting joint unit between the FAO and the IAEA. And I'm asking because I checked your website in between, and I was very interested to read that you're also working in developing countries, and you're working with the approach to respond to nuclear emergencies with regard to food and agriculture safety and so on. And I would like to ask you to elaborate on this. And also within this topic, I would be interested if you're cooperating with the joint unit between UN Environment and OCHA, which is sitting in Geneva in Switzerland, which is OCHA is the Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, which also responds to environmental catastrophes and so on. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We get into this topic after the Fukushima incidents in 2011, when we were asked to be there to look at how to deal with the, because we are the joint division of nuclear techniques in food and agriculture. So how to deal with for example, sampling and analysis, and then helping the Japanese government in terms of some of these issues. So, we have been very much involved during the incidents and subsequently until now. As a result of the work, we realize that there is a lacking in terms of a system where you can, through this visualization platform or a computer platform system that we are developing, that that has two components where we can advise on the policymakers in terms of sampling strategies depending on what crops and when. So we need to know the crop calendar, the crop type, and all that. And then in the other side is the analysis. So what type you are taking and how to analyze. So we are also working on that. And after you have information from these two, then it go into this system, and this system will allow policy makers or scientists first to know where and how serious the problem is, and then through this system disseminate information to policy makers on how, when, and what to do. So this is, and in terms of collaborating with the organization, I'm not sure, but we work with JRC, the Joint Research Center in Italy, okay, and many international organizations. So could be this organization is maybe not directly but indirectly working with us. But there are a lot of international organizations involving in nuclear emergency.
Thanks a lot. The lady here.
Thank you very much. My name is Vivian Endley, and I have a question regarding Eastern Basin. You said there's not much means for enforcement, and my question is, we have been able to observe that weather events have become much more severe the last years in South America especially, and do you think that the possibilities to start slowly still leaves enough time to really change something and to really maybe save the situation in the future to still maintain living in these places? Thank you.
Well, so there's at least two sides to that. One is in terms of mitigation. So there's a lot of the effects of climate change in the Andes or the Himalayas or anywhere are very, very complex. So dealing with the problem after the fact in adaptation is very complicated. I think where enforcement becomes most relevant is in mitigation, like the climate accords in Paris, for example. And whether that is going fast enough, no, definitely not. But whether it will definitely be possible to live in a lot of these areas, well, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty here. But it seems to be possible to live. Whether it will be possible to live with the same kind of agricultural methods and the same kind of infrastructure for water and so on is more difficult to say. And it's definitely the case that the policies and the measures that have been put in place for adaptation are not sufficient now. Whether there will be time to implement them before things become too severe, it's hard to say. I mean, the countries in the Andes, for example, are very interested in making it happen. But what we've seen is the funds aren't there. And while the world is going to promise a lot of money to the Green Climate Fund and other climate change adaptation funding mechanisms, that hasn't happened yet either. So we will definitely have to see much faster implementation of the agreements we have already, and more stringent and more effective implementation of adaptation for a lot of the most disastrous effects to be prevented.
Thanks a lot. The lady in the first, please.
I guess my question applies maybe to all the panel members, and it's about rainwater catchment.
So I'm just curious whether it's a solution that is viable and that it can be applied maybe by local communities, individual farmers, on a larger scale. We're just wondering. Thank you.
I can start. I mean, it certainly is done already, and I think it's a very good, let's say, measure to in urban areas to, for example, not only to catch the water for let's say drinking or plant irrigation purposes, but also for controlled infiltration to new groundwater resources. Because I mean, we have an increase in surface sealing in Austria of several hectares a day. And this is area that, when it rains, it directly relates to runoff generation. It goes into channel systems and directly into river systems. So controlling that, even in our country or in Austria, is actually interesting and possibly effective way of dealing with desertification. In other areas, I had colleagues that did their PhD in Africa on just collecting surface runoff for irrigation purposes, and I think that's in those areas where water is much more limited than here. It's essential to work in this direction.
Okay, Emilia.
Hi, thank you all for your presentations. My question goes to Mrs. Frank. You mentioned that the alliance between the two organizations provide support and coordination to member states on food security and climate change. And also you mentioned that agriculture consumes 70% of the total freshwater resources. And I was wondering about the meat consumption, and if the association, the alliance has any power to encourage member states to shift from a heavy meat consumption to, let's say, more vegetables, because from these freshwater resources, the highest amount goes for production of meat consumption and not for human consumption. And I was wondering what power do you have, and what can you tell us more about it? Thank you.
Thank you. Our projects are demand driven, so we cannot tell them what they should do. But we have a regional project in Africa where the emphasis is on vegetables. You were mentioning vegetables, because these are high value crops that allow them to grow, feed the family, and extra and sell as cash to enhance livelihood. So yeah, but in many of these countries, Mongolia and Africa, animal is an important asset, and they use that. The Maasai eat mainly with meat and drink blood, and but they are also, so they need the animals. So in a way, we do not say that you should move to agriculture or a vegetable, because the situation sometimes does not allow vegetable to be grown. For example, in Mongolia, it is so dry and it's only pasture grazing, so animal is grown there. So I don't know if I answer your question.
Thank you. I was wondering about the crops used to feed animals, if those crops could be shifted to be used for human consumption and not for animals that are later slaughtered for human consumption.
Because the animals, they normally graze on grass and sometimes legume or mix, the mixture of both. So I don't know if we can get maybe you have some idea.
Yeah, just one idea. So in a lot of agriculture that is going on in say Austria or in my own country, in Norway, a lot of the feed for animals comes from things that we definitely could eat, like soybeans, for example. So I mean, yeah, it was definitely true that we can't eat grass. There is a proportion of the feed that we could definitely eat, and we could get produce food much more efficiently that way. Definitely.
Yeah, because like maize is also you grow maize not just for human consumption, but a lot is half rate and you use it for animals to eat. So yeah, like our colleague said, there are quite a few crops that you can use for even for bioenergy.
Yeah, I will keep this question in mind and I will answer it later. Yeah, the gentleman in front, please.
So this is a kind of general question, but I'd like to direct this one to Magnus. Now, when you're in the mountains, do you depend on surface or satellite temperature measuring devices? And if the one or the other, why? Sorry, could you repeat that question? Well, if you are in the mountains and you're looking into climate change effects, etc., and if you're looking at the temperature, do you depend on surface or satellite temperature measuring devices?
So sadly, I'm not doing field work so much, so my work is generally focused on kind of policy development. So we rely on other scientists to do that work. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure it varies. Maybe you can answer my question too.
Yeah, I mean, we use actually heavily. I mean, you have meteorological stations. In Austria, you have a higher density than somewhere else, but this is a temperature measure in 2 meters high. With the satellite, you look at really top surface temperature, but we use that, for example, to derive latent heat fluxes on a regional scale in order to support water balance measurements. Or you use surface temperature from satellites to look at crop status, if there's drought stress. I mean, and not only temperature, you have other sensors and other wavelengths you can look at where you can have a quite good picture on the status of the vegetation. And this is of course used very much because we already have satellite imagery since the 1970s, 72 when Landsat was launched, where we start looking at like 40 years of the satellite data, where we can look at changes in parameters like heat area index over time and relate it to weather and climate conditions, and that's very helpful. Except, I have to say that, I mean, satellite is always something you look indirectly. You look just at the spectral response of the atmosphere and the surface, and you always have to validate that at some point to some degree with ground measurements, and this is why ground measurements are important here.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Adriana.
Yes, my question goes to Mr. Anderson, because he mentioned vulnerable groups and how it's important to prevent that the big companies like mining companies extract the water resources that are needed by local populations, which is ultimately indigenous populations. So my question refers to indigenous rights. What is the situation at the moment? Because you said it's important to address this issue. I believe this is maybe the most important issue to address when talking about national resources management in the Andean region. So what is the situation at the moment? Are the government policies on indigenous rights concerning water, are they sufficient? Are there differences between the countries, and is it even realistic the countries cooperate on this issue? And are they willing to discuss this issue? Did they discuss this issue openly in the talks you had, or you were monitoring, or is it something that countries would like to keep to themselves? Thank you.
It's definitely a contentious and important issue. One issue that we often see is that a lot of countries have rules in place, for example, how much a mining company can pollute, and who they're supposed to cooperate with, and the rights of, say, the municipal government in the area to set restrictions for the mining companies. But what we often see is that in a lot of countries there's a lot of corruption. There's a corruption of the government officials that go there to measure the water. There's corruption in the local government. So while the rules exist a lot of places that could prevent some of these issues, but actual on the ground implementation is oftentimes lacking. Now, governments are usually not so happy to talk about the rules that aren't being followed in their own country. So that's definitely a problem. And I'm not sure how to solve the corruption issues in this area, but it definitely is a problem you're pointing to.
Unfortunately not. Okay, one last question and then we are done.
Okay, thank you. So my question goes to Mr. Anderson. Yes. So you talked about the fact that more and more natural disasters occur due to climate change, and I agree with that. But do you think it is also possible that people are so scared of and focus on climate change that we forget that there are also like events like with El Nino years, like last year, and that are natural?
Yeah, no, definitely. And in a lot of places, for example, unsustainable logging in the mountainsides can be just as much could be actually the main reason why you have, say, a landslide in that particular area. And it's generally impossible to really say whether a particular event was caused by climate change or would have happened anyway. And that's, I think you're looking at climate change, you can only really see as sort of the trends in these natural disaster events, rather than pointing at particular events and say whether they happen or not. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
Good. So, as we are not ahead of time anymore, I unfortunately have to close this panel. I think it was a fruitful panel, and I think now you also have some more knowledge about the different projects and about different organizations. And I thank all of you for your time, panelists. And as our previous panel speaker, we also have prepared a small present for you. And also, if you have any further questions, just address them to us and we will forward them to the panelists for sure. And the presentations from UCAS, I know, we will also upload on Drive, so you will all receive them. Good, so kindly please approach me. We are going to close the panel and then I will have some few remarks afterwards.
chair.
No.
Maybe on your seat or there's like
yeah, we don't have so much time anymore. Till 2 o'clock we have to be back here, but sharp, please don't be delayed. We will guide you down through the canteen. Today it will be very crowded, as I think you have also a meeting, a big meeting, the agency. So I really kindly ask you to be quick and then be back here at least by 2 o'clock. Okay? Enjoy.
You go and you walk in the city a little bit, you take air, you go, you eat. Be careful with the money.
Oh,
hello.
is it
This is working, you know? It's family-ness.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's a time
Yes,
lapse.
if they're watching us, the friends from Alex in California.
Oh, California!
Oh, the people are really watching. They're writing comments on Facebook. Don't go. Seriously. And you're dancing.
Is doctor
There's
Can we leave our stuff here?
I wanted to take a
I think I'll leave like
I don't work for my... Yeah, I don't work for my... In my opinion, I would just... No, I would leave my pen.
No, I mean when I... Also bis 7 kann man wieder reinkommen.
Of course.
Ja, also bis 7 Uhr ist das Ding halt offen und dann kannst du mal rein.